Other means.
It's great to see everyone here. We've got a great crowd. Welcome to the noon meeting of the Rotary Club of Baton Rouge. Before we start, please remember to silence your cell phones so they don't interrupt with today's program. Our invocation will be led by Barry Bloomberg. After the invocation, please stay standing for the pledge, which will be led by Jamie Burgess. And after the pledge, please stay standing for the four-way test.
Thank you. Of God, source of life and love, we give thanks for this meal and for the nourishment it provides, just as we express our gratitude for the friendship and fellowship of Rotary. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord let his countenance shine upon you. May the Lord let his countenance shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you peace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Of the things we think, say, and do,
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And now Rob Daguerre will introduce today's guests.
Please join me in welcoming our guests today. As I introduce our visitors, would you please stand to be recognized, and members, please hold your applause until all the guests have been introduced. Catherine Heitman, guest of Barbara Clark. Betsy Barnes, guest of Haggai Davis. Trey Nelson, guest of Fred Dent. Jan Detlefs, guest of Phil Detlefs. Bobby Johnson and Sandy Blake, guest of Liz Hampton. Carson Marcantel, guest of Clifton Ivy. Luz Randolph, guest of Carmen Million. Paula Zeanah, Richard Davis Jr., Ruth Ann Oakey Frost, Sarah Henshaw Fuselier, guest of Susan Nelson. Tierra Williams, guest of Diana Payton. Joanna Wortell, guest of Lois Smith, and Kelsey Mays, guest of Christy Mays.
To all our guests, welcome. And now we will have an introduction of a new member by Barbara Alton.
It's my pleasure to introduce Craig Zombucker, our newest Rotary member. I've known Craig for 14 years. A native of Lafayette, he moved to Baton Rouge in 1994 and graduated from Bishop Sullivan High and then graduated with LSU with a degree in economics. I first met him when he was a single young man working as a marketing rep for Home Instead. In his role, he often stopped in at Alzheimer's services to play his accordion or squeeze box at Charley's place. Our clients were so enamored with him, they threw a wedding shower for him and each gave him their pearls of wisdom on marriage. When his first child was born, they again showed their admiration for his entertainment with a baby shower. Fast forward a few years, and Craig and his wife Katie now have 3 children, Stella, Henry, and Ruby. Craig has been working for the Hospice of Baton Rouge as the Director of Development since 2019, raising funds and in donor relations for the organization. Most people don't understand hospice and often fear the word. Craig, in his kind and caring personality, eases family concerns at a most vulnerable and often difficult time. His compassion lies deep in his soul, so much that it is he who I called when my husband was placed on hospice. He has also been a board member for Family Services of Baton Rouge and is currently the board chair. I know he will be an active member of Rotary and represent us well.
Welcome to the club, Craig.
Thank you.
Today's head table, to my right, your left, Jamie Burgess, Senior Vice President, Hancock Whitney Bank, Barbara Otten, Executive Director, Alzheimer's Services of the Capital Area, our newest member, Craig Zombucker, Judith Roberson, Vice President for Institutional Advancement, Franciscan Ministries of Our Lady University. I'm Maui Tachi, your club president. Dr. Charley Zeanah, our speaker, who will be more formally introduced. Susan East Nelson, principal owner, PFD Consulting. And Barry Blumberg, President, Blumberg and Associates Incorporated, who led us in the invocation. Your head table. And now Jeff Gold will tell us about our blood drive next week, Wednesday.
Good afternoon. Have any of you ever woken up in the morning and go, I wish I could save a life today? And, that's something we can do through the blood drive. So next Wednesday from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, we're going to have the blood drive here at Drusilla. You don't have to sign up. Love to have you come and join us if you're able to give blood. Critical need in the Baton Rouge area and really throughout the country and world. I also want to share just a little known fact about a rare blood type. I don't know if anybody in here is familiar with the term golden blood group. So anybody heard that before? Yeah, so very few people probably aware of that. I was not, so I started doing a little bit of research on it, but basically it's called RH-null. It's a blood that contains no RH antigens, which are proteins, on the red blood cell. It's estimated that only 50 people worldwide have this, and that of that, there's probably 9 donors that can give it. The most interesting fact I found, though, was that a significant contributing factor are children of brothers and sisters who are married and cousins who are married. They have children and they may have this default. So I think we can reasonably conclude that most of these cases occur in the surrounding states of Arkansas and Mississippi. So, thank you.
How do you recover from that?
I see he left off Alabama. And now Carmen Millian will give us an update on our holiday project.
I hate to follow that. Okay, have you ever woken up in the morning and it's Christmas morning and you don't have any toys or presents under the Christmas tree? Well, that's what I'm here for. Okay, we are having our angel adoption project, and I agreed to head this committee because I don't have any grandkids. I mean, so these are my grandkids. I get to buy for them. And so what I am up here for basically is to beg for money. So what we are challenging our club members is to do a couple of things. You can, one, help us shop. Oh, and let me tell you, we've chosen to adopt 100 children. And I've already adopted my 2 that I'm personally going to buy for and donate. So we ask that if you don't want to shop and you want to give money to a female who is more than willing to shop with your money, I'm that person, so yay. And my husband will be so excited. But so what we're going to do is, I have some hard copies, but Sherry is going to email each one of you. And we had a committee meeting before I got here, before I came up here, and one of the club members made a statement that I thought was real, I never thought about, because a lot of times when you adopt these kids, you're adopting a family. You know, you're adopting 1 or 2 brothers and sisters, and he doesn't want to shop, shocker, and so what he wants to do is donate money and allow us to make sure that whole family, all the kids get items. So think about that, and we're trying to focus on spending between $100 and $150 per child. That seems like a lot, but when we're buying necessities, and guys, if you look at their wish list, I want to cry just talking about it. They ask for diapers and wipes and clothes. They don't ask for the big things. So we want to fulfill these kids' needs, and we want to make sure they have something to open up Christmas morning. So if you don't want to shop, of course I'm willing to, please consider donating money. Also, ask family and friends if they want to adopt. There's a link that we're going to send out. You can allow them to adopt on that link. And we have to start shopping soon, so we need the money right now. So open your wallets. And no, Sherry's willing to bill you, but because it's going to end, we have to turn in the items to the club office on December 2nd. Yeah, it's fast. So I'm begging. She's going to send out a link at noon. It may have already gone out. All your phones should be dinging or vibrating. So go to the link, either agree to donate money or agree to shop for us. So any questions, I'll be out here after the club. And I don't have anything to say about Alabama or, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Carmen. And now past President Stephen Winkler will do our membership drawing for September.
And a little something extra. Of course. But first, thank you again, Community Coffee, for the gift that we're giving out this week. So thank you very much. River Roads next week, so stay tuned to us. As always, we want to thank each of you for contributing and monitoring and encouraging people to join us. All of you who are guests today, I have applications in my pocket, so I'll be glad to hand them to you. You can fill them out before you leave, and we can have you in the process in no time. The good news is I'm not in this list of winners, so I can't win these prizes, so that's the way it goes. So it makes it fair to everybody else, even though I really should be the one getting the prize, but that's neither here nor there. All right, could we have the dial up and we'll spin and see who our winner is this week? Very good. Uh-oh. While they're looking at that, though, of course, as you know, I can't So I had to go with the Tinker Toys. And of course, this is the one in the world that is signed by our speaker. So, I'd love to be able to give them away.
Might have to do it next week.
We may have to.
I think
Do we have the list of names and I can just draw them out of a hat? This is, this is what they call dead air. Well, I was thinking about Livingston Parish when he was talking about Jeff, when Jeff was talking about.
I think we'll do it next week. We'll do it. We'll move it to next week.
So we'll have 2 winners next week. So thank you very much. And of course, all those of you, don't forget, please send in your nomination so you can be one of the possible winners next time. Thank you very much.
Next week, Wednesday, November 10th, our speaker is U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, and he'll be speaking to us. He'll be giving us a Washington update on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So that should be interesting. And then Wednesday, November 17th, our guest speaker is Jay Daniels, Chief Executive Officer of the East Baton Rouge Parish Housing Authority, and his topic is Rethink Housing. Charlie, every week, on behalf of the speaker, the Rotary Club Foundation donates a book to Crestworth Elementary. And this week, the book is Head Over Heels First Date by Leah Tadino. And now, there we go. And now Susan East Nelson will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to be very brief because I want him to get to his presentation. I got to know today's speaker when I was part of the Early Childhood Policy Leadership Institute at Tulane back in 2018. In his program, our guest today teaches judges, legislators, educators, healthcare leaders, and even attorneys like me about all of the issues that can surround young child development. This, of course, proves that he can teach anyone. Charley Zeanah completed his undergraduate and his medical degree at Tulane University. He then went on to his internship in pediatrics at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, followed by his residency in psychiatry at Duke, and then another residency in child psychiatry at Stanford, followed by a research fellowship also at Stanford. He is internationally recognized, let me underscore that, internationally recognized for his research in child brain development. He was part of a landmark study that many of you have heard of about the institutionalization of children in Romanian orphanages. His book is the basis for modern child brain development today in the field. Charley Zeanah's major academic interests have been in the area of infant mental health and adverse childhood events, and we've heard about ACEs a couple of times before this club. In addition to his academic and clinical work, I've seen Charley testify before the legislature and work with state agencies on the needs for investment in infant and early childhood mental health. So not only is he an international treasure, he is someone who has worked very hard for Louisiana's children. Today, it's my honor to present to you Dr. Charley Zeanah.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be with you, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But first, I want to acknowledge a couple of special guests. Sarah Hinshaw, who's a colleague and faculty member at Tulane, who's here. And my bride of 42 years, today's our anniversary, so happy anniversary. One of the reasons why it's a great honor for me to be here, for all besides the usual reasons, is that in 1967, my dad was president-elect of this club, and then he was transferred to New York, and so that was the end of his relationship. But this club was very important to him, and I remember going as a kid as his guest a couple of times to the meeting, so I know he would be very happy that I'm here with you today. Okay. So now we have the leap of faith that things will actually work. I am a child psychiatrist. I'm not an economist, so I'm more interested today in talking about the why than the what, but here's a little bit about the what. I don't know that much about investing, but a 13% return on investment sounds pretty good to me. That's an average of high-quality birth to 5-year-old programs. That's a return on investment averaged across a number of these programs, compared to 7% for pre-K alone. And the message there is simple: the earlier, the better. speaking of the earlier the better, and focusing not on just a educational approach, but working actually with the family, the Nurse-Family Partnership is an intervention, a home-based intervention that begins prenatally and continues through the child's second birthday. It's been in Louisiana for over 20 years now. It's an expensive program, costs about $9,400 per family. These are 2015 figures. But by the time the child is 18, the return on investment is $60,428. Not an economist, but that sounds pretty good to me. If I say, here's $9,000, somebody says, here's $60,000 back 18 years later. So $6.4 back for every dollar that's invested. So what I'm mostly going to talk about today is why that is. And the why has to do with how the brain develops. About 40 days after conception, nerve cells begin to form, and they have a cell body, and they have these little bitty branches coming off called dendrites, and they have this very long branch called an axon that comes off. And those axons connect to other dendrites or other cell bodies and form what are called synapses. That's the connection between two nerve cells that's shown schematically there. And then once a bunch of nerve cells have connected to a bunch of other nerve cells, we get actually a circuit. So if you think of these axons as threads, the circuits basically form a fabric, and that becomes the mature brain. Then the final stage is this fatty substance called myelin lines that long axon that extends out from the nerve cell body, and you can think of that as sort of electrical wire insulation. It just makes the transmission faster and more efficient. So all you have to really worry about for this talk is we're going to talk about synapses for the most part. So that's the connection between two nerve cells. Okay, so it turns out that we are born with a certain number of nerve cells, and then we have this exuberant overproduction in the earliest years of life. So we make way more connections than we need or that we're going to use. And the reason for that is that allows for maximum adaptability, because it turns out experience is going to play an important role in sculpting the brain, actually sculpting the structure of the brain based on the experiences that a young child has. So by the time the child reaches adolescence, the synapses that have not been fired repeatedly, that have not been used, begin to be retracted or pruned away. And the reason for that, it's not good to have too many synapses that you're not using. It's more efficient if you don't. And so that's why by adolescence we have this retraction. The neuroscientists call that the use it or lose it principle. The use it or lose it principle works two ways, because if a child is raised in excellent caregiving conditions, then the brain forms in the way that we like it to form. But if the child is raised in the absence of those conditions, then the brain forms in a way that's not so optimal. So we have about 20,000 genes in our body, and they outline the basic structure of the brain. And if there are problems in that, then usually they're incompatible with life. So the basic structure of the brain is formed by these 20,000 genes. But a lot of details are finished by the nature of experiences that young children have. So sure, you have a house that's framed and maybe you have your Tyvek up, but look at the inside. There's plenty of details remaining to be determined, and that's what experience does. The other point is that the way brain architecture works is the basic skills get laid down first, and then we build and refine on those later on. So if you get the foundation right, you're in much better shape, and you don't have to do this kind of shoring. That's a very expensive process to work on basic problems with the foundation, which is why the earliest years matter so much. So, move on here. There are basically two ways that experience affects the brain. One is that we all hopefully continue to learn throughout our lives, and new information gets taken in and incorporated by the brain, and that can affect how the brain functions and to some degree how the brain is structured. But especially important is that it turns out our brains anticipate receiving certain kinds of information at certain critical periods in development, most of them in the earliest years of life. And if that information doesn't come in the way that the brain anticipates, then the brain is not going to develop in the way that we'd like it to develop. So the specific input coming in at certain times, it's called sensitive periods or critical periods of brain development. It's extremely important. Now, here's the bad news. The brain is very plastic and very adaptable, but that adaptability diminishes over time. So if you look there, from birth to 5 or so, there's a tremendous amount of capacity of the brain to adapt and develop in whatever way the input dictates, but that diminishes gradually over time. In addition, the physiological effort, or for today's purposes, the economic costs of doing something to change the brain later becomes astronomically higher. As the brain's capacity to adapt diminishes, the cost, the physiological effort to overcome that, and the cost to society of overcoming that becomes astronomically more. So, what's the most important ingredient for healthy brains? It turns out it's relationships with caregivers. Who'd have thunk it, right? The most important thing for young children's healthy brain development is the quality of their relationships with their parents and caregivers in the home and with their caregivers in childcare or pre-K or wherever they happen to be. So the human infants are what's called an altricial species. It means they're completely dependent on adult caregivers to care for them. They can't just venture out on their own as newborns. So they require lots of protection and support. And it turns out in these relationships with important caregivers, they learn how to regulate responses to stress and responses to adversity. And in the absence of healthy caregiving relationships, their ability to respond to stress and respond to adversity is greatly compromised. So the most important context for brain development is relationships with primary caregivers. That's the take-home message for the day. So here I'm just going to show you that it's really not that complicated. Here's a dad and his 2.5-month-old daughter. You can start the video. So that is called brain building. That's what he's doing. You can almost feel the synapses forming in that little baby's brain as she's interacting with her dad. Now, her age is significant here because she's 2.5 months old. Around 2 months of age, if you think about the first couple of months, what do babies do? They sleep a lot, they cry, they eat, they pee, they poop, that's about it. It's not a very social time in development. And then all of a sudden, around 2 months of age, you smile at the baby and the baby smiles back at you and it knocks you out. And in addition to social responsive smiling, they also begin to coo responsively and to make more sustained eye-to-eye contact. There's this huge social blossoming, which you can see in this little baby here. Now, let's consider a baby in very different circumstances. Can you play that one? This baby is 8 months old. So what's happening here is Paula, who's a baby whisperer, is trying to get this baby to smile. Now, smiling responsively at 2 months of age is so hardwired. It takes almost no experience for babies to know how to smile, and yet this baby really can't manage it. 8 months old, 6 months after this behavior that's very programmed, is supposed to appear. It just needs a little bit of input from the environment. But this baby living in conditions of deprivation in a Romanian institution doesn't get that, and therefore can't manage this very simple task of just smiling responsively to an adult. It's just to show the age there. Okay, so now this is a schematic representation of two different children's brains. The one on the left is like the first baby that we saw. And what we're doing is we're looking from the top of the head down. That little triangle at the top of the circles there is the nose. So you're looking at the top of the head down. And this is the amount of electrical activity in the brain. So red and yellow represent more electrical activity, and blue and green represent less. So look at the difference in the first baby and the second baby. The first baby, growing up with all this responsiveness and attention and focus, has this nice, healthy red. In fact, I'll show you here. But this baby who grows up in conditions of deprivation has just less electrical activity in their brain. It's as if someone took a rheostat and turned it down, just a dimmer switch on the baby's brain. This is entirely based on experience. These two babies have different experiences, and it affects how their brain is functioning in a quite dramatic way. And these patterns can persist. If things don't change for this baby on the right, that will persist over time and greatly compromise the baby's ability to think and function. So there's a particular set of cognitive abilities or thinking abilities that we call executive functions. And those you can think of as kind of the air traffic control system in the brain. It allows us to do multiple things at multiple times, to focus on different kinds of information, to set goals, to make plans, to make decisions, to adapt and change if we need to, if something goes awry, and to not be impulsive, but to be able to resist impulses and function in an adaptive way. And so this is one of the real keys to, you may have heard the term school readiness, for kids being ready to get to school and learn. Because if kids come to school and they haven't had the foundation that allows them to have mature executive functioning, then they're greatly disadvantaged. And it turns out there's data that indicates, this is data from Chicago, they look at kids attending Chicago public schools, which are mostly disadvantaged kids attending in public school there. And then you look at private schools in Evanston, which is a very wealthy community. And if you track the achievement scores of those kids at third grade, the kids in Evanston are way ahead of the kids in inner city Chicago. However, if you track them through the 8th grade, the two lines never change. So the kids in Chicago make just as much achievement progress as the kids in Evanston, but they start behind and they never catch up. That's because third grade's too late. We've got to get in earlier when there's more brain capacity to adapt to different kinds of experiences. So to illustrate this is a study from New Zealand, very famous study, in which they brought 3-year-olds in and assessed their ability for what they call self-control, but it's basically a reflection of their executive functioning capacity. And they divided the kids into 5 quintiles. So number 1 is the lowest 20%, and number 5 is the highest 20% of the kids on this observational assessment of self-control. And then they followed up when the kids were in their 30s, so adults. And we're looking at health. Look at the health indicator of the kids in who have the lowest self-control at age 3, and look at the kids who have the highest levels. Huge differences in their health outcomes. They also looked at substance dependence. Much more likely to be substance dependent if at age 3 they don't have this self-control that the kids in the high group do. How about income? Similar story. Kids with the lowest amount of self-control are going to have the lowest incomes at age 30, whereas kids in the highest are going to have the highest income. What about crime? That's something we're concerned about. Kids who have the lowest self-control at age 3 have the highest levels of crime. 40% of the kids in the lowest level of self-control at age 3, 40% of them have been convicted of a crime by the time they're in their 30s. So this is not to say that early experience is the only thing that matters. This is a population-based study. It's not an intervention study. They weren't doing anything to change anything. They're just tracking these things over time. But in the absence of intervention, you can see that we can have kids who, if they don't get off to a good start and we don't do anything to remediate that, then they're in significant trouble later on. So this is from the Harvard Center for the Developing Child, and they're trying to sort of summarize what are the critical things that young children need. And this is what interventions typically entail: supportive and responsive relationships, reducing sources of stress, so buffering the children from adversity and stress. And there's very good evidence that kids who are surrounded and grow up in very stressful circumstances, if they have high quality caregiving relationships with their caregivers, they're protected from all that adversity surrounding them. And strengthening core skills, which can happen at childcare or pre-K or whatever, but remember this dad who's brain building. That's strengthening her core skills for him to talk to her responsively in the way that he was doing. And when kids get these things, then they're likely to have healthier developments, higher levels of educational achievement, and become productive citizens with successful jobs and careers and families and all the things that we want. So, how do we align our investments with what we know about brain science? Well, it turns out not very well, because here's where brain development is happening in the earliest years of life. There's much less of it later on. And where do we spend our money? We spend our money here. So we're sort of missing the boat here. Here's a return on investment schematic. And you can see programs targeting the earliest years. So birth to 3, you get the highest return on investment. Pretty good for preschool programs. Begins to level out in K through 12. And then if you get to job training programs and things like that, return on investment is far more limited. Why? Because the brain is less adaptable at that point in time than in the earliest years. So who says all this stuff? Well, it turns out it's this guy, James Heckman. In fact, he says, as states are under constant pressure to improve the efficient and use of ever-dwindling financial resources, any investment away from young children can be viewed as a diversion of resources from the most efficient use of those funds. That's pretty powerful stuff. And who's this guy? Well, he's a Nobel laureate at the University of Chicago. He's an economist who does these economic analyses of just the things that I've been talking about. And it turns out there's a tremendous convergence of neuroscience, what we know about brain development, child development, and what we know about the programs that are necessary to help kids succeed, and economics. They all converge on the earlier you get in, the better, and the bigger return on investment, not just in terms of money, but in terms of producing people who are happier, healthier, and going to do well. So, I want to thank you very much for your attention. I don't know, do we have time for questions? Yeah, we do. I'm happy to take questions or comments. Yes, sir.
Do you have anything to say about epigenetics, what the adverse childhood experiences of the mother affecting the neurodevelopment of her fetus?
Yes. So epigenetics refers to changes, doesn't change the basic DNA structure, but it changes how genes get expressed or not expressed. And it turns out that lots of experiences can lead to epigenetic changes that either are for the good or for the not so good. And we know that adverse experiences that the mother has, not just prenatally, but postnatally, have an effect on that child's biological development, social development, etc. But again, it's important not to be overly deterministic, because we're in those earliest years, there's lots of flexibility and lots of capability for making up for whatever problems may have existed prenatally or whatever. Yes, ma'am. You had?
I was asking a related question.
Oh.
I was asking a comment on the body of research that shows persistent traumatic experiences can change the DNA that then can be passed on. That's not maybe what the research says, but you tell me.
Well, it doesn't change the basic structure of the DNA molecule, but it does affect molecules around the base pairs, and those changes are important in having, my analogy for this, if you think about wine in a bottle, the cork is the epigenetic processes. So you can have wine in the bottle, but you put the cork in, and you're not going to get any wine out of that. So gene expression is related to things like a process called methylation, which is an example of epigenetic changes that you're talking about. And again, positive experiences will lead to certain patterns of methylation, and negative experiences will lead to others. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, you discussed the effects, the positive correlation between children's self-regulation and positive effects. So can you discuss the way that children can attain self-regulation?
Yeah, it turns out, this is kind of great news, that the same kinds of parenting and caregiving that allow children to develop healthy socially are also the same behaviors that are responsible for their cognitive development early in life. So if you look at the precursors of the child's quality of attachment to the parent, we know a lot of it. Sensitive and responsive caregiving by the parent allows the child to develop healthy attachments, also promotes executive functions. And the interventions that we've designed to help kids kind of get back on track if they've fallen off are designed with those findings in mind. Yes, sir.
We probably all observe families sitting at a table where the young kids are on an electronic device or TVs. So to what degree does that substitute for interaction with a person?
Briefly, not well. So it turns out that songbirds learn their particular song from their fathers. So their fathers are called tutors, and the fathers sing and sing and sing, and the songbirds imitate their singing and learn the song that's correct for their species. If you play videotapes of the father singing that song, they can't learn it. It has to be the actual bird, not the representation of the bird. Yes, ma'am.
Is the brain of the infant or young child who is under stress similar to the brain of a PTSD Vietnam veteran whose serotonin reuptake is screwed up?
Yes and no. So there are two major ways of thinking about how brain development goes awry. One is that you don't get the input that you need, which is what I was illustrating in the videos. I didn't have time to go into the other side, which is input that you don't need and don't want. So threatening input, exposure to violence, being abused, those kind of experiences. Those experiences particularly affect the development of fear circuitry in the brain. They tend not to be as pervasive as the effects of neglect. They tend to be more specific. So there are similarities in the effects of PTSD. PTSD has been described in children as young as 12 months of age, and some people think can occur even sooner than that. But on the other hand, it's happening in young children to children whose brains are still developing. So it's in some ways, you're much better off than you are with a PTSD veteran who's in their 30s or 40s or 20s or whatever it happens to be, because that's a period of time when there's more capacity for recovery, if you will. Yes, ma'am.
One quick question. We have early Head Start centers for 0 to 3-year-olds. And one challenge that we're seeing is a challenge of mental health clinicians with experience in infant and toddler mental health. And wanting to see, is that something that's across the board throughout Louisiana where that's a challenge, or maybe more so within the Baton Rouge community? And do you provide services here in Baton Rouge?
Yeah, so some colleagues of mine at Tulane oversee a statewide program that provides mental health consultation to child care centers. And the deal is that if you sign up for this, then you get a 6-month, I think it's 6-month intervention from that consultant. And then they go into other centers. And there's evidence from Louisiana, from that consultation, that the quality of care provided by the caregivers is increased significantly by that intervention. Now, could we do more? Sure. I wish we could. I wish we would, if you go back to that, where are we spending the money? We're spending the money at the wrong end of things. We need to move more money down to the front end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zeanah. Thank you again, Dr. Zeanah. Meeting is adjourned.